Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Ted Hulsy. I'm Vice President of Marketing at eFolder and your host for today's webinar event. Welcome to our eFolder Partner Chat webinar series. This webinar series brings together leading eFolder partners for business-oriented discussions. Today's topic is 6 takeaways from writing an MSP contract with a savvy attorney. Today we are joined by Robert Cioffi, CEO of Progressive Computing. Before we go through today's agenda, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. The recorded version of the webinar will be, and along with the slides, will be made available to those who registered for the event. We will also post a recording of today's session to eFolder's YouTube channel. With over 300 people registered for today's session, we've put all participants in listen-only mode. You can enjoy the audio portion of today's event either by streaming it on your computer or by dialing in over the phone. Your questions are strongly encouraged throughout. We have planned a special Q&A section at the end of today's discussion, but you can submit your questions as we go along, and I will be monitoring the Q&A log, and we will try to address them on the fly. Let's go through today's agenda. It follows a rather logical flow. First, I'll introduce our guest. Then I'll turn the floor over to Robert as he shares his journey on recrafting his firm's own MSP contract. We will discuss some important philosophical and business issues at the top and then launch into the 6 key learnings and takeaways that Robert gleaned from this process. So I'm pleased to have Robert Cioffi joining us today. Robert's a longtime eFolder partner. I think we first maybe met in HTG, but Robert also serves on the eFolder Partner Advisory Council, and we're very thankful for that. He's a great contributor in that forum. Robert, welcome to today's webinar.
Well, thank you, Ted. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak to everybody listening on this call and this recording. So we've been an MSP for about 23 years. Based in the New York City metro area. We have an office in Manhattan with our headquarters based in Yonkers, New York, which is just north of New York City. We have approximately 15 employees and growing and 1,500 endpoints and growing. And I think what prompted this discussion was a conversation around a process that my company went through approximately 24 months ago when we were looking at our agreements and kind of, just got that feeling in the pit of our stomach that these things are just not up to snuff. They're full of holes, and we need to have something more professional and quite frankly, a lot better than what we had. So I guess that's what we'll be talking about today, a little bit about the journey that I went through to go from point A to point B. And I know the title says with a savvy attorney. Just full disclosure, I'm not an attorney, but I did consult one, and that is actually one of the things that we we'll be discussing today.
Right, and we're not, and just so it's clear, we're not providing legal advice on today's call. So, please consult your own legal counsel. But we're talking about business best practices. So
correct.
Yeah.
Robert,
we talked a little. Yeah, I think you talked a little bit about kind of before embarking on the discussion. There's some kind of philosophical things around, how you run an MSP practice that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stark differences that seems to come up, and you mentioned HTG earlier, where we are a very long time and proud member of, where we get a lot of great advice in terms of best practices from like-minded IT professionals across the country. And there just seems to be this big divide between having a contract or not. And in our case, we are on the side of the fence that it's month to month. You can cancel at any time. There is no locked-in language. Just a quick story I'll give here. 3, 4, or 5 years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I was meeting with a prospect, and they had just fired their CFO, and I'm talking to the new CFO who's there for a month, and they wanted to change their IT provider, And we were just about ready to sign, and then he came back to me and said, oh, I'm sorry, my predecessor just signed a one-year contract with another IT firm, but this is the firm that, he had been saying that their company hates. So it just was a little incredulous to me that anybody would be forced into doing business with anybody if the relationship was that sour. But I don't know. Call me a fool for thinking that that's a backward way of running my business, but I think it's a selling point when you tell somebody there is no commitment here from you other than 30 days. You got to give me 30 days to be out, and you're out. And there also seems to be a growing number of people or firms in the country who are now including equipment, that hardware as a service, as part of their package. And I would caution you before you start embarking on that you better make sure you have a lot of things buttoned up in your company before you start thinking about, well, I'm going to throw in a firewall. Well, I can also give them a PC, and I can work with a leasing agent, and I could do their servers too, and I can bundle this in. There's a lot of legal things that you need to be concerned about, and a lot of operational maturity that you need to achieve before you go down that road. I've met a lot of savvy IT companies, people who are very successful, and few of them do this. So I caution you about that.
What are the big risks? I mean, Robert, while we're on this topic, I mean, what are the big risks that you've come across? Or what I guess first do people think are the advantages, and then what are the big risks as you see them?
Well, the huge advantage is something that we'll talk a little bit later on, and something that we've incorporated into our agreements, and that is everybody wants their clients to achieve a certain technical standard, right? You don't want to sign on an account and realize suddenly that they have a bunch of Windows XP computers, and that's all they have, with a Windows 2003 server. You're obviously going to spend a lot of time maintaining that network and chasing problems, and if everything is old, you're going to have a lot of issues. So obviously, when you can control the hardware, it's a specific brand firewall, it's a specific brand switch, it's a specific model PC, it's the same PC that every one of your accounts has. You're obviously going to reduce your support costs because of the familiarity across the board and the ease of replacing these items, right? So I think that's fairly obvious. The downside to this is it gets very sticky about, well, I think it's clear that they don't own the equipment, but it's in their use, and what happens if something changes with the relationship and they want out? Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to absorb all that equipment back? Because the lease will likely be on you. I mean, unless you've got extremely deep pockets and now you're in the banking business where you're doing self-financing, now you're sitting on a lot of equipment. So to do this, and it's kind of hard to jump into this because it really only makes a lot of sense if you're doing sort of a volume amount of business. If you do one or two of them, then you can find yourself, very much hurt. But if somebody cancels, but if you have 30 or 40 of these and somebody backs out of a deal, all right, well now I have an extra 15 PCs on my hands that I can use as spares, and it doesn't hurt so much. So
right.
The ramp up to get to there, I think, is one of the difficult things.
Okay. All right. And so you guys have made the decision to, the clients own the hardware and software, the product component. They own it. You manage it. Is kind
Correct.
of how you've.
And I'll be the first to admit that I just do not feel, even after 2+ decades of doing this, that we are mature enough to properly do that at this time. I mean, it's something we think about. We would want to get there, but we're, I'm just admitting, I'm looking hard in the mirror and saying, hey, you're not ready for that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. So those are kind of some philosophical things right off the top. Let's kind of maybe talk about your journey a little bit further. Like, why did you want to hit the reset button, 24 months ago? What was the situation?
Well, I just felt that our agreements were not reflective of the changes that were taking place around our business and the way we were delivering services. We even found ourselves in a couple of situations where somebody was calling something out, that there was conflicting language from one piece of paper versus another, and it really kind of put me in this position of feeling, you know what, you just don't know, and I would rather protect myself. You don't know when somebody is going to, call their attorney and sick them on you, and I just would rather make sure things are buttoned up. So what I did is I went to my HTG group, 10 other companies just like us from across the country, and said, could you please give me your contracts, your agreements, which they all happily did. And I sat there for, what was probably about a 15 to 20 hour journey of just reading through everybody's agreements and pulling out all of the best ideas and all the things that I liked and all the little pieces of language that I go, oh man, I got to have that, right? Or that's really smart. And then to kind of accelerate this this conversation a little bit, what happened is, I started to write it myself, but I had the wherewithal to know that I am not an attorney and I probably should consult one. So I reached out to somebody that I know in the community and asked for his advice, and I found, I think I got really lucky, and that's the one nugget I would like to pass on to everybody today, is that make sure you vet your attorney. My attorney, first of all, called himself a counselor, and he wanted to know about my business before looking at any of the contracts or having any discussions about the fine points of the agreements. He really wanted to understand what my business was about. And so I'll give you a for instance that I explained to him that we are very relationship focused. In fact, we don't like to call our clients clients, we call them partners, and I gave him some more information about our core values and things that make us tick. And when he read the agreements that I gave him, of course, in my own language, he cited a couple of things that said, this is pretty strong language that you've got here. You're taking a pretty hard line on these particular things. This does not match well with your core values and does not match well with your position on being very relationship focused. And it struck me immediately to say, wow, this is an attorney who's usually paid to insert all sorts of things that no human being can understand unless you have a law degree. And here he was, advising me to soften things up for the betterment of the relationship. Now, obviously, he was looking to protect my legal interests, but, there's a way to say it, and then there's a way to say it, and he was the right fit for us. I got lucky, so my takeaway for the rest of the listeners is that make sure you find somebody who is aligned to your business goals and values, who understands your business, and who's going to ask you those questions first.
And really be a partner with you in the process. I mean, I think that's what's impressive, is that he first understood your business, and then he didn't take your draft and just say, okay, well, let me layer on some more legalese here. He helped you drive alignment with your own philosophy.
Absolutely. Yep. And I'll point out something later where he pointed out, he called me out on and said, this is just way too much. You're over the top on this. And we ended up scaling something back. So I'll point that out later on.
Now, a couple questions have come in, and I just want to make sure we get this one addressed at the top. So Elroy wants to know what group of people were willing to give you their contracts. So maybe just double-click on what HTG is, what a peer group is, a little bit more for the listeners.
Well, HTG stands for Heartland Technology Groups. It's a peer group. You can, through the magical powers of Google, you can go figure that out, what it actually entails. But in summary, it's a peer group of IT professional companies from around the country. In fact, it's now in the UK, Australia, and but Canada and the US are together. And we meet quarterly off-site for 2 days to discuss our business practices. We share financial information, and we just basically help each other grow. So it's the owners or key decision makers of your firm would show up to this event, and for 2 days just act as each other's board of advisors.
Great.
Right, so here on this slide, when we looked at the agreements, one of the things that I found from one of my peers was that he had separated a lot of the, I'll say, the housekeeping language out of the managed services agreement or the the BDR agreement or whatever other kind of agreement. Like if you got a security package that you keep separate and you want to have a contract or an agreement for that, he pulled this stuff out and he called this a master services agreement, which I thought was brilliant because it explained this is the business that we're in. This is how we operate. Here's our hours of operation. Here's our holidays. Here's how our billing policy works, and all of that stuff. And it even had in there, which I then later inserted because not everything was in there, but your confidentiality, your non-solicitation of employees and things like that. It's all that kind of housekeeping stuff that just kind of got it out of the way. And this is something that we give to anyone because not every, we're not strictly an MSP, meaning we're not going to turn you away if you want to pay us by the hour. In fact, sometimes we start out a little bit that way just to kind of, hey, if you want to kick the tires, I'll send a tech for a couple hours, just pay us. You sign our MSA, our Master Services Agreement, and then if you want our Managed Services subscription, then you sign that as a separate document. If you want our cloud hosting infrastructure solution, there's a separate agreement for that. If you want a BDR, there's a separate agreement for that. So this just defines all the basic, limitations of liability. It really is a break-fix kind of contract, but it opens itself. The way it's designed is that it's intended that there will be what we call sub-agreements that attach off this eventually.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I mean, as I was kind of alluding to, all the other contracts are just limbs off of this. So, we're an artisan infrastructure partner. So, there's your IIAS contract that falls under that. So anything to deal with how a virtualized infrastructure in a cloud solution, provided through us is under that. Our BDR contract, a la eFolder, of course, 100% there is a separate agreement, and it has its own twists and turns and languages, and same with our managed services agreement. So the idea of breaking these things up was one of the shortcomings of my original version of this prior to undergoing this process, and even I'll say my first draft was I was trying to cram everything in one document, and not only did it become extremely unwieldy, but it became very long. So by breaking these things out into, here's a 3-page addendum on BDR, or here's a 4-page addendum on a hosting contract, right? It just became much easier in terms of the flow and explaining things and reading it from the client's perspective. And that's something very important that I would urge everybody to think about, the client perspective.
And I guess it's kind of, I mean, something that's I'm curious about is, has it changed how you sell? Have you found that, closing new clients on the agreements is cleaner, simpler, they're more satisfied? I mean, what kind of business results have you seen from kind of rationalizing the whole thing?
Well, I will say this, that because what I had prior, so my situation might be a little different than others. What I had prior, honestly, it just wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. So there was very little resistance in signing it. What we have found is that it invariably brings up a lot of questions because people see this paperwork and they were like, wow, like this is a lot, right? And it's important and they get it, but the questions that they ask tend to strengthen the relationship because, I mean, and they may be tough questions like, hey, why does it say this? You get to talk about those things sort of up front. Even though you verbally made the sale and you're trying to close it, it may sound, maybe sales closers might get upset by this, but I feel like it may slow things down a little bit, but it gets everything on the table right away, and then
Right.
we can come to terms, and they'll have a more natural or better understanding of what it is that we're actually delivering it and how we're delivering it before they actually sign. So when they sign, they should be extremely comfortable. Yes, I understand this.
Great. And I'm just kind of, maybe to back up a little bit. I mean, you said your old contract was, quote, not worth the paper it was printed on. I mean, what were the things that were keeping you awake at night in terms of liability?
I mean, there were just so many things, Ted. It's almost a little hard to point it out, but there was, there was absolutely no language, all that kind of standard stuff that you find in the MSA, like, about, here, I'll give you, for instance, that we specifically put an arbitration clause into our contract, meaning that we don't want to go to court and fight about this, that we want to go to arbitration, because arbitration is going to cost you and me a lot less money. And quite frankly, what I tell people is, even if we have to get to that, then there's something wrong here, right? I want to fix this before it gets to that level, right? And then at that level, I'm not going to let a piece of paper stop you from anything. If you want to leave, leave. But, if they want to sue me, then, because if I got some, crazy, hot mess on my hands, it's just absolutely bonkers, and I've done everything that I can to possibly save the relationship, they can't just drag me into court. We can go to arbitration and let an arbiter figure this out. And I feel better about that, right? And it's just a softer way to approach this. Right? Instead of talking about you're gonna pay me back my attorney fees and all that stuff. Nah, I don't know about that, right?
Okay, great.
So there's a lot of little, like, that's a good example, and I'll say the non-solicitation, we were burned last summer because we did not have a solicitation or a non-hire clause, because we had a large account walk away from us, which actually was a good thing, but that's a whole other conversation. But they had an old agreement signed with us, and it had nothing in there to protect us in the event that they wanted to make an offer to an existing employee. And that kind of hurt us, because then I had to go out and hire a headhunter, and I had to train somebody, and honestly, the guy that we hired to replace him was recently let go because he just wasn't working out. So there was, 10 grand of headhunter fees down the toilet, plus, 6 months of heartache trying to get this guy up, So you see what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to talk about my dirty laundry, because we all have it, whether you admit it or not. And, crap happens. So I wish I had had that in place. At least I could have maybe gotten something out of it, like, hey, maybe you pay my headhunter fees, right? And so now the pain is less.
Right,
So
or it wouldn't have happened, or it wouldn't have happened. I mean, it would have set the right tone. I mean, all of the clients that you're bringing on board under these new agreements will be on notice. We can't hire away our service provider's staff, or if we do, we're going to find ourselves in arbitration.
Yeah.
And paying for their recruiter fees or whatever else, or whatever their damages. But so I think those are some great examples of where, if you really haven't thought through all the weird stuff that can happen down the road, it can be costly.
Yeah.
So you're certainly mitigating those risks of happening in the future, for sure.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we came across, and this is the example that I was speaking, that and I call him my attorney, actually, his name is Steve, and Steve advised me, because I gave him like a list of like 50 things of exclusions, and it turned out that the exclusion list in our managed services contract was longer than the page on the things that we actually provide them. And I didn't see it that way. I saw it as I'm trying to protect myself, right? I'm trying to think like an attorney, and I'm trying to, figure out how to, plug every little hole so I don't have a problem. And my vantage point was, I'm doing a smart and good thing for my company, and everybody who reads this or who's going to sign it should value and appreciate that. And his take on it was, hey, come on, Robert, wake up. Like, you're sending like a negative message here. The things that you won't do is longer than the things that you will do. But on the next slide, if you want to jump ahead, I listed a number of things that in our contract that we just don't do. And some of this is based upon odd requests that I've gotten over time, right? Now, this list has been pared down, believe it or not, and it may even still be too long, but I think it's a lot smarter than it was. And in here is, here, I'll give you an example, physically repair, and then there's that word cleaning of printers, copiers, scanners, or fax machines. We had a client once ask us to come in and clean their equipment because it was dirty, physically dirty, right, and wanted us to open up all their computers and remove all the dust. And it took me, the better part of a couple conversations and maybe 2 hours of time to explain to them why that was such a terrible idea and that that's not really the scope of services that we provide. And I'll say that I end up winning the argument, but I felt like that was one of those things that I needed to kind of explain to people, like, hey, if your crap is dirty, like, don't expect me to clean it. That's not what we do. Maybe if you hired an IT person on staff, maybe you could tell them to do this, but it's not what we're going to do. And some of this is a little out of date, like support for non-Microsoft OSs. At the time, we were not supporting Mac. Now we are. But there's some good ones in here, and I would challenge everyone to take a look at this list. There's probably at least a dozen on this list that some people might be writing furiously right now. I got to write that down, or let me do a screenshot. I don't know if you're giving out the slide deck, Ted, but
we are giving out the slides. We are giving out the slides.
So stop writing and listen, because I got all this good stuff to say. But some of this stuff was based on experience. Some of it was stuff that I read in other people's agreements, and some of it was just stuff that I kind of thought about it when I went into this, month and a half long mode of I've got to reinvent our agreements here. So please.
And a lot of this, it seems to me, I mean, it's not so much, harebrained client requests. I mean, there's certainly some of those on there. I don't know, hey, come move this 70-pound thing around our office. But it's more like business decisions that you've made where, scope creep could happen overnight if you let clients do it. And this is just saying, look, well, this is where the demarcation point is. We do these other things, but we don't do these others.
Right. I mean, like, I joke around during sales calls. It's, we're going to take care of everything. Like, whatever, that's sort of our managed services pitch is whatever you can think of, we've got it covered, right? I mean, which you have to temper it with some of these things, normally reasonably in terms of maintenance. But what I'll counter that with is, look, I'm not coming into your office to paint your walls or clean your carpets. Like, that's not what we do, right? So just understand that that's the contrast. And, I try to make a little bit of a joke out of it and in order to help them delineate. But when it comes to the brass tacks here, you've got to sort of itemize the things where you're going to draw the line. And admittedly, this list is still a little long, but I felt I needed to keep these things in here.
And this is the shorter list after your legal counsel.
Yeah. Can you believe
helped
that?
You paired.
Yeah, it was about it was about 50% longer than this. So there were a bunch of things that I went back and said, all right, I want to get this down at least to 2/3 of the size. So and I got it under, I think it's 25 if my last count. So.
Okay, now, but do you often, I mean, if you have an exclusion, if the client comes back and says, well, but I do want somebody to help me with this, can you manage the vendor? I mean, like, I'm just looking here at data destruction services. I mean, there's a lot of hard drives that aren't properly disposed of, and there's it in my opinion or experience, and or computers that aren't properly disposed of. Is that something where you'll do a vendor management task for the client?
Yeah, absolutely. And like what you don't see, it's kind of hard to look at this list and, please don't judge me harshly just by looking only at this list, because when you read this in context with the rest of the agreement, there are lots of things around vendor management, and some of the things that we itemize where we will help out. And in fact, we are unofficially now providing that service, but through a partner, but it's more of a referral right now. So we're not branding it or co-branding it or white labeling it right now. We may in the future, but I felt, no, this is electronic waste disposal has so much, so many problems associated with it. This is the best way I can say it, that right now I'd rather just refer the business to somebody and help manage the relationship. But don't feel that, because there were times when people would give us stuff and say, here's a 20-year-old inkjet printer, you must have some value for it, and and shove it in the tech's hands as he's walking out the door, right? And
Yeah.
now I got a whole, my whole kitchen is overflowing with dead printers and machines, and I'm like, well, how did this stuff get here?
Right. Right. Yeah, people don't understand that the end of life of IT has a tremendous cost associated with it. Somebody's got to bear it. So.
Yeah, people still think, oh, there's value in this. My brother is moving out of state, and my sister-in-law showed me the closet full of computer stuff, from when the kids were small. They're all out of college now, and I'm like, I don't want any of this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's obsolete, but it doesn't feel right to get rid of it. So we all have this probably, as technical people, we also have that problem.
So this is a good segue into the next slide, because when you are providing a flat fee service to support a network, and I was very guilty of this, we were very guilty of this, where we would basically say to everybody, I don't care what you have, I just want you to sign the piece of paper, right, and start sending me a check every month. And that's the natural inclination, I think, is to, depending upon the maturity level of your business, whether, you're the sole proprietor or you're the owner, operator, or whether you've got a team of salespeople, you've got to be careful about what you're inheriting. And we have developed a sort of a technology scorecard matrix, or a report card, if you would, and we do a complete evaluation, and I'm sure everybody's using tools like Rapid Fire, just like we are, right? There's no secrets here, and all that's great, but we actually have developed our own minimum spec. Things have to be a certain brand, and they have to have certain attributes. I'll give you, for instance, if we're going to support a server, it must have hardware RAID. Now, everybody's probably saying, I haven't seen software RAID in a long time, but you know what? Every once in a while, you come across, some joker who's got a server running Windows 2003 and software RAID, and right there's two strikes. So develop some sort of system is my piece of advice. Develop some sort of minimum spec that you're willing to support, and give them that information. I'll also offer, it's not a secret, but a little thing that we do is when we find things that are subpar or out of spec, or any which way you want to say that, or failing, right? We'll say, look, we'll take you on, but you need to make a promise to us, right? And that promise is usually in the form of some sort of email, right? I'm not going to have them officially sign anything. That we're going to develop a budget over the next 12 months, and that we're going to address all these issues, right? So my vantage point is it's a little bit of pain up front, but the long-term annuity is tremendous. So, eat a little bit, right, up front, and do what you can to extend yourself to make somebody happy, and they'll be with you forever.
But so, just getting practical, though, I mean, so having a minimum standard and driving standardization are key strategies, but, how does, when the rubber meets the road, on a practical basis, will you not take on a client if they've got just a complete mess, aged infrastructure, or will you say, look, I'll bring you on, but you have to make these $20,000 investments in new equipment,
yep,
and here's the project budget?
I'll give you a great example, and I don't know, maybe some of you out there might be shocked by this, and some of you might say, yep, I come across it every week, but I came across a deal, I don't know, 8-10 months ago. The guy has a DOS-based application, and I used to be a DOS developer, XBase. many decades ago. And so was this guy running this company, and he had this homegrown application, and he preferred to have Windows 2000, Windows 98 machines on his network. So at first, the business conversation was, what kind of business you're in, and, what do you do here, and, oh, you need a server because your server's old and it's dying, and we're going to put we even had talked about a BDR. And then when I kind of walked around and, and then I found out, oh, he's got this DOS application that he built himself, and he and I were kind of connecting on that level, kind of sharing, old war stories. And then I looked around the network and said, oh my God, like everything is like so old. I don't even know if I can install my agents on these systems, and how would I do things like patch management? And in the end, it was not a fit, and simply because of this scenario. And I don't know how we would ever support them, because, how do you find drivers for a Windows 98 machine, or how do you do anything? And honestly, we did a small project for them. I wish we hadn't. I mean, it looked nice on paper. It was like 10 or 12 grand for a new server and a bunch of other, work. And the tech I assigned to it went bonkers. This guy drove him batty because of all the crazy old stuff that had to connect to it.
So sometimes walking away might be a better choice, but in kind of a less complex scenario, is it just a catalyst to do upgrades at the beginning of a relationship? Will you ever make you talked a little bit about, forcing the client to commit to like an evolutionary budget. I mean, is there some gray area there? Will you make some exceptions as long as they, commit in writing to the upgrade?
It's like, okay, here's a video, like a PC that we use to watch, the IP cameras, some security system, and it's a 6-year-old Windows 7 machine, and it's some no-name brand. Nobody's actually using it all day long. It's just the thing that drives the images up to, some monitors. Am I going to jeopardize the relationship and signing that contract because of this one machine in the corner? No, right? But if everybody's got a 6-year-old machine out of warranty and there's 20 of them, I might kind of push that issue a little bit more so. So I think you have to pick and choose your battles. And I think the point here about this is that the fact that it's in my agreement, and the fact that we've made this front and center in our operations and our even in our sales process to make sure that we do the report card, forces that conversation to happen. And you'd be surprised how many people want to have that conversation. A lot of the times where MSPs, especially those of us who are maybe a little smaller, might be feeling like, whew, I got through the conversation about, getting him to give me $2,500 a month. Now, do I want to start talking about having him to spend another 20 grand on doing upgrades? You almost kind of feel like, all right, I got him, and now I'll just support him, and I'm good, right? And let me go on to the next thing. But I think it's bad business to do that. I think you have to have this conversation, and if they're not willing to recognize that, oh yeah, I mean, this hurts both of us, right? So we need to take this very seriously. We need to look at how we're going to get from a C+ on that report card up to at least an A-, right?
Right. And pretending like the issue is not there and then getting creamed on your labor costs down the road or service satisfaction is just a bad business decision. And so having it be part of your process and having it be upfront, discussed upfront, really forces you. I mean, you can discover right away whether you're dealing with a client that understands that, investing in IT is going to translate into higher productivity and success for the company or not.
Yes, absolutely.
And you really don't want to take on clients who, don't really understand the ROI equation on investment. So.
I'll say that this, even though we're talking about agreements today, but having some sort of report card, it tests, it helps to qualify the prospect, right? To really know, is this somebody who's going to take stuff seriously or not? Because if they balk at, if they're like a D on your report card and they're balking at even just getting to a B-, let's say, maybe you should reconsider that whole, maybe you don't want them to sign your agreement, right?
Exactly.
And then this last point here is, one of the things that we had realized, and I got this notion, and it's really honestly, it's a very simple thing about not making sure that you've got some language in your agreements about periodic price increases. And I discovered this, or the first time it really made me think of it, even though it's just so simple and obvious, was when we moved into our current office. When we signed the lease had an automatic 3% increase every year. Then the schedule was completely printed out as far as exactly what our rent would be, for the specific dates of the five-year lease. And, that kind of made me think, at first, was like, I don't like this. Like, I only want to pay for the next 5 years this rate. And then it kind of made me think, well, that's not really fair to them, because, cost of living goes up. I mean, here in New York, we get clobbered every year with health insurance. I'm sure if you're in the area or if you're in a big city, I'm sure you are too. But it's ridiculous, the cost of living increases that go on every year with a business. And if you're not careful, your expenses will start to creep up over time and start to erode your EBITDA, or I'll say your net income. And you'll find yourself over time, if you don't increase your prices programmatically and or almost automatically, that your profitability is just going to eke out of the barrel very slowly over time. And if you look a couple years later, you'll say, wow, where'd all my profit go, right? Like, I'm still paying myself, but I got nothing left in the kitty at the end of the year. So we instituted a automatic, every 12 months, there's an increase, and this now becomes a matter for my finance person to handle. She sends a notice, this is your 12-month anniversary, your new agreement price is this, have a nice day. I mean, sort of that, right? A little better worded than that. But it's just an automatic thing, that there's no negotiation. Oh, I got to go and I got to meet with that client and talk about a price increase. That stuff just happens automatically.
And can you go on record? What is that annual increase? What is the percentage?
Well, we ask for 4%. Sometimes we will negotiate depending upon who it is and what the deal is, and we may just say, all right, we're going to take it out, but next year we're going to have this conversation, and we're going to, we have tools. I'm sure many people on this call are listening, using similar tools as we are, where you're looking at things like effective rate and profitability on accounts, and if you're not, you're crazy. You really should. There's plenty of tools out there that help you with this, but we're going to reevaluate. And in one case, with a bigger account, it was, I don't know, about $5,500 a month. They were a little hesitant even to sign. So one of the sale tactics that we used was, all right, look, let's take out the increase, and next year we're going to sit down and discuss the value of this. And if you don't see the value, then leave, right? But if you do, then we're going to put this thing back in. And guess what? Those 12 months came and went. They saw the value, and they didn't balk at all.
Okay. All right. So I mean, you start at 4. I mean, that's probably maybe 1 point above what like the 10-year average inflation has been.
Yep.
So it's a little on the aggressive side maybe, but it's a starting point. And I think, I mean, the crazy part is that I've talked to a lot of MSPs, and it's kind of like, because they hate the conversation, they just take out the automatic increase, and it's like, well, you're
hurting yourself.
You're not setting yourself up for success. You've got to bake it in there. No matter what the government says inflation is, it is higher than what the government says it is, and there's inflation creeping in all different parts of your cost structure every year, and you've really got to get the clients to pay for that, because your costs to serve them are going to be going up.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's a good starting point, but then you get creative on the negotiating side. So a couple questions came in just as this topic was being explored. Shane wants to know, how do you add additional seats to the agreement?
Well, we're trying to automate that, but we're not very good at that yet. And right now what's happening is we've got a process where we are using some tools. We're a Kaseya shop, so we're looking at Kaseya, and we're starting to use ConnectWise user-centric to get user counts in. But you know, it is a little bit of a pain, and it's a manual process, but you just have to have the discipline to do that. We don't automatically bill because I just feel there's too many problems with that. I know that there are some systems that will just populate like into a ConnectWise, which I'm assuming 80% of the people on this call are using, to automatically bill. But you know what happens, a user gets fired, but their account stays active, and there's that whole hot mess. So I would prefer to do it manually, erring on the side of the relationship.
So you're saying that you know, in your customer base, you don't have like companies growing like on a massive, you know, month-over-month clip. And so if they, you know, are net 2 seats up 6 months in, you're not going to necessarily just auto bill like a piece rate for the additional 2 seats that goes back, but you're going to at some point go back and confront, hey, look, workforce is. Yeah.
We're not doing that right now, and on a quarterly basis, we're auditing everything, looking at, you know, are there any changes here? And then plus, I'll say the team here is savvy enough and wise enough to know, hey, there was, you know, a couple of new people that joined. So I think that means something. I better say something to somebody, right? So that happens sometimes. As well. Admittedly, our maturity level there is not where it needs to be.
Okay. Another kind of related question to the you know, baking in price increases. Joe wants to know, you know, the price increase, is it built into the sub agreements or the addendums or the MSA? Or both?
It's based upon the, it's not in the MSA, it's in the sub-agreements, because each sub-agreement has its own pricing. Remember, when you sign the MSA, there's no financial commitment to signing my MSA. You're not buying anything. All you're doing is agreeing to a bunch of terms. That's it, right? You could sign the MSA and never do business with us. You know, so that does not prompt an agreement in ConnectWise or anything like that. All that just does is it says you've signed the agreement. Now we can move on to the next stage, which is what, you know, if you want to agree, if you want to engage hourly, you can, and if you want to get one of these agreements, you can. So, for instance, we just with our backup agreements, our disaster recovery agreements, which is all based on the eFolder BDR. Awesome technology, by the way, Ted. Not that I need to sell it to everybody on this call, but we just went through a price increase with that because we noticed, wow, look at these. Some of these have been in place for years, and no one's ever gotten a price increase. So we just kind of bumped them all up a little bit. And I won't share with you that number, but I was a little shocked about how much money I found.
Okay. And then just kind of a tools question from Elroy. You know, what kind of tools do you determine your income or profitability? So it's kind of like, so you've mentioned Kaseya, ConnectWise. I mean, what do you use for accounting?
Well, our accounting is QuickBooks, but accounting is not really, you know, that's to me that is not the answer to this question. Right now, we've been using a product called MSP CFO. They're based out of Connecticut. The owner's name is Larry Cobrin, I think is the last name. And it's a great tool. I mean, it's not perfect, but it gives us a lot of great information to act on. There are some other really good tools out there to plug into, whether it's Kaseya or LabTech. We're starting to use a product called Warranty Master, which is a very good tool to use in terms of having conversations with your clients. You know, you may be doing some sort of technology review with them on a periodic basis. I would highly recommend that you use something like that that's kind of relates more to the scorecard side of the picture and making sure that their machines are under warranty and that they're not too old and they meet certain, you know, oh look, here's a Vista machine that still is out there we need to replace, things like that. So between those two,
I,
yeah, go ahead, Ted. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
so MSP, CFO, and Warranty Master. So just help me to understand. So MSP, CFO, is this helping you to understand kind of the profitability of different products or client engagements based on
It
labor costs and that
it
sort of thing?
helps us to understand the profitability on our agreements, but a little bit beyond that is the profitability on the account because, and I'll give you a good example, if you have an account where let's say the effective rate that you're getting on it is, let's just say you're in a market like here in New York and maybe you want to make $1.75 an hour. Just throwing a number out there. It almost doesn't matter, right? But the effective rate for that account is $1.60 an hour. And you might say, my pricing is a little soft on that, right? But that account buys a ton of crap from you every month, and it's a lot of high margin stuff. When you factor that in, your effective rate with them, what they call contribution per hour, might be $2.25 an hour. So you might want to leave that one alone, right? You don't want to go poking the stick in the beehive and, for them to say, oh, well, you know what, I'm not going to use you guys anymore. I'm going to go use Progressive Computing. And now they're giving all that business to me instead of you. So a tool like that can really help you understand what is the account worth, and then also what is my, how does my agreement really look. But I'll tell you this, the word of caution here is that you have to be super disciplined in your teams to make sure that everybody is getting all their time in and that you are really taking a hard look at your work types and and all your practices in terms of time entry, because that was a huge killer for us. If we, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you don't have a good handle on getting quality data in, all of these tools that help you manage and monitor things and measure things are worthless because you're measuring crap, right? So you've got to have, you got to fix your internal problems before you start looking at tools.
And just so that it's a little clearer on for me at least, you mean you're doing managed services in most of these cases, so you're not billing out technician time by the hour, but you really need them to be logging everything they do on an account by account and task by task basis so that you understand the labor
Correct.
The labor cost and contribution to each one of those accounts.
Right. It was a lot more noticeable and painful, Ted, when I noticed that when I charged by the hour that we didn't bill enough time for today, right? Because it was very front and center noticeable. But then, somebody kind of whispered in all our ears, oh, do managed services, flat fee, don't worry about billing. And we all got starry-eyed and then forgot about the importance of getting that time in. The importance of getting that time in, I would actually argue, is maybe even more valuable now because there's so much more on the line and there's so much more at risk. So you've got to be highly disciplined. And again, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I think we do a pretty good job, a really good job, not an excellent job at it yet. We still have some holes to plug there. So I take all these numbers that I get and then I kind of discount them a little bit. If I see that a report is showing me that I'm making $200 an hour on an account, I know it's probably more like 180, right? I'm just going to take a little bit off the top because I know that some techs just, sometimes they forget or something doesn't get input into the system, and invariably there's that leakage, or if you've been in a supermarket environment, you have that natural shrinkage, product shrinkage. So it's the same thing, time or product. It's out the door.
So we've got time, everybody, for a couple more questions here. Brandon said, can we get copies of your agreements? It's not something I asked you to do, and that's not an expectation I set with our audience here. But I guess
Brandon,
maybe
if you join HDG 23, I'd be happy to share them with you. Honestly,
there you go.
I put a lot of time and I spent a lot of money with my attorney, and I'm just not comfortable putting them out there.
That's not in the cards, but I guess what other, so joining a peer group, that's a great place to start. Robert, I guess, just a question, are you aware of other places where people who maybe are in a more immature state in this area where they can access resources to get started?
Absolutely. So we're a Robin Robbins member, so if you've thought about that, I know that she's got resources in this area. In fact, I looked at some of that stuff and it was, I'll say it was helpful to some extent. I know that CompTIA also has, and it's like dirt cheap to join them, has some resources. And I know there's a couple other organizations out there where you can join and get this sort of stuff. But be prepared to put in, I think I sank probably about 100 hours of my time into this, between all the research that I did and talking with my attorney and revising stuff and tweaking it and just thinking it over, getting other people that I trust to look at it. It's a big endeavor, but I think it's important to do it.
Right, and I think you in exploring what the process you went through with your lawyer, you really underscored the fact that this is something you want to make that's your own and aligned with your own business strategy, your own philosophy of service. This is not a boilerplate exercise, go hand Robin Robbins a big chunk of money and you're good to go.
Yeah.
You've really got to, I mean, you need the templates, you need the boilerplate, you need the jump start, you need the peer groups, you need all these other inputs, but you also need to, like you said, spend a lot of your own time to make it something different and unique and
Yeah.
aligned with your own strategy and philosophy.
That's 100% right. Like, even if I did freely share my agreements, some people would probably only plagiarize half of it. In fact, to plagiarize only half of it is actually kind of hard because it's so intertwined with everything else that you'd be pulling pieces out, not really having a good product in the end, which is why you kind of, I think, like you said, is start with some templates, read through some other things, and then start to craft your own based upon all that.
Right, and I think it kind of, I mean, goes to, I mean, I think what was great about today's webinar, I mean, one of the many good things is that this is all about your own philosophy of doing business and how you're building an MSP practice. There's a lot of gory detail in terms of, what you're philosophically going to do or not do, and that's got to flow through your contractual position with your clientele as well. So
Absolutely.
There's really no shortcut on that. I mean, I think everybody looks for the silver bullet. I mean, we produce this content to educate, but at the end of the day, there's some of the extra labor and thinking and value add that you as a business owner need to put in is unavoidable, and you don't want to cede that. I think there's no shortcut.
I'll say this, Ted, even the best agreements that I read, because I read, they were all over the map. Some of them were like, this is horrible, right? And then I read other ones that I was like, wow, this is impressive, right? But even those, I would say it was only 60% of the way there for me, because there were just
Right.
things that I wanted to change, or like you said, things that I wanted to make my own. So, yeah, I think it would be difficult to just simply take somebody else's template and run with it.
Okay. Well, great. I think we're just about out of time here. I want to end by thanking Robert Cioffi from Progressive Computing for sharing all these great insights on today's partner chat. So, Robert, thank you.
It's my pleasure, Ted.
Okay, and everybody else, thanks a lot for making time for today's eFolder Partner Chat webinar. This is Ted Hulsy, Vice President of Marketing at eFolder, signing off. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot. Take care now.